Newsfirst Newsline with Faraz Shaukutali.
Good morning and a very warm welcome to Newsline, live from the Newsfirst studios in Dawson Street in Colombo. Today, the 8th of January, is a day full of many anniversaries, some happy, some tragic. Today marks the first anniversary of regime change, when the people of Sri Lanka, weary of watching an accumulation of power to the executive presidency, voted out the 2 terms President Mahinda Rajapaksa and selected instead his party Secretary General Maithripala Sirisena instead. Today is the anniversaries of many a people. One of Sri Lanka's top 10 billionaires, according to the Rich List 2013. Ishara Nanayakari is 43 today, and on a personal note, Chanel is 19. But today is also the 7th anniversary of a tragic incident yet unresolved: the unlawful killing of Lasantha Wickramatunge. Lasantha was, of course, the founding editor of the Sunday Leader newspaper, in his heyday known as one of the most outspoken newspapers of the country. 7 years on, the killing, although it made international headlines and aroused the conscience of the democratic world, remains unresolved. Amazingly so, in spite of the fact that the party that Lasantha openly supported remains a key component of the new post-Rajapaksa government in Sri Lanka. Lasantha was not only the editor-in-chief of the Sunday Leader newspaper, a newspaper owned in the majority by his family, but was also a much regarded and respected anchor on this network. Lasantha was, in essence, a man for all reasons and for all seasons. The champion of the underdog, the voiceless, and those slated for many a number of other reasons. In honouring Lasantha Wickramatunge and to mark his 7th death anniversary, I extended an invitation to the current holder of that office. And joining me this morning is Mandana Ismail Abe Wickrama, the editor-in-chief of the Sunday Leader newspaper. Good morning, Mandana.
Good morning, Faraz.
It's an absolute pleasure to have you on the network.
Thank you for inviting me.
And thank you for being here on time, Mandana. Mandana, 7 years on, and today the first anniversary of regime change. Yaha Palane, or good governance, an encouraging result for Sri Lanka? And firmly in place, with President Maithripala Sirisena celebrating his first year in office. How important a victory was it for Sri Lanka's democracy and sovereignty?
Yes, Faraz. Well, going back in time, back to 2015, January 8th, looking at the situation at that time, of course the January 8th victory was a victory for the people. Because by then, the situation in the country, and speaking as a journalist, when it came to media freedom, it was at an all-time low. Basically, we were scared to even walk on the streets. And at that time, people were losing hope of democracy with the president at the time amending the constitution so that he could continue in power for an umpteenth number of terms. And given the situation, there were lots of changes in the consistency of parliament as well, and there was an altered 2/3 majority in parliament where any legislation could have easily been taken in, and that is a first sign of a bad democracy, when you come to a parliament where legislation cannot be debated as it should be or challenged as it should be. And given all those scenarios and the threat faced by many activists, media personnel, and so many, the change was a necessity. It was an absolute necessity where the people were concerned, and for the country to move forward, it was a necessity. And of course, regime change was an important victory for the people.
And it was a natural change, wasn't it? It sort of came up from the people.
Yes, it was actually the people who came out with it, because if you look at President Maithripala Sirisena, he was not groomed as such as a future leader at that time under the Rajapaksa regime.
Yeah.
So given that scenario, as well as the fact that President Sirisena at that time was a general secretary of the Sri Lanka Freedom Party, when he stepped out, there were doubts about how it would be, and there was an enormous risk that the president and Minister Duminda Dissanayake took at that time. But fortunately, there were lots of people, a majority of the country felt that there needed to be a change, and there needed to be a change for the better, and they voted for good governance. They voted for democracy. So people who voted that day voted for those policies and principles, I think, rather than a particular individual. They voted for that entire system to be in place. So therefore this government has a duty to ensure that those principles, good governance, democracy, media freedom, all those principles are set in place.
And so, Mandana, would you say, would the consequences of an unprecedented third term for Mahinda Rajapaksa, would it have been truly disastrous for Sri Lanka?
Yes, I would say yes. And there are reasons to say yes, because coming from a background of the Sunday leader, we have exposed many issues of corruption. And today, if you look at it, most of the investigations that are carried out by the FCID and the CID are based on investigations done by the Sunday leader. So going by what we have written throughout the years, you can see the enormity of the issue at hand, as well as the issue of nepotism. And with absolute power, you know what happens. And we are talking about a scenario where there was absolute power and no one to question. Arbitrary decisions were made and there was still no one to question. There were decisions made and action taken without any consideration of consequences. Then there needs to be power, that should be there, but absolute power needs to be kept under check. And when we came to 2015, January 8th, we were at a disastrous point. Looking at all the indexes, the proper indexes, I mean not the inflated ones, you would see that corruption was at a very high level. You would see that democracy was at a very low level. When it came to media freedom, it was at a very low level.
We were about the fourth most dangerous place in the world to be a journalist.
Exactly. So if you were a journalist, you had to think twice if you were going to walk on the streets alone. You would have to look over your shoulder several times.
Well, in your case, indeed, going to sleep.
Yes. Sleeping was a crime at that time too.
Indeed.
So it was a difficult situation, and the suppression of the media, and then suppression came in many forms. Initially it was physical attacks, and then finally it became veil threats, and then threats resulting in most media personnel imposing a self-censorship.
Yeah.
It came to such an extent where people couldn't write the names of the VVIPs of the former regime.
Yeah.
It came to a point where even if you speak out the names, that could not be aired in electronic media. So when you come to a situation like that, yes, we have reached a disastrous point and a change has to happen. And that happened in last year, and it was for the better. Let's hope that it continues.
We were getting a call in from one of our viewers who's asking what of the many promises made by the former president to have an expeditious inquiry into such matters as the killing of Lasantha Wickrematunge. He promised many times. And,
yes.
And today it's 7 years. And today is also 7 years and 2 days since our own premises was attacked and burnt and bombed.
Yes.
With a Claymore bomb, no less, the end. So what of those promises?
Yes, those promises, there have been many promises made, where especially whenever there was an attack on the media, there were instant promises that were made, and letters sent to the IGP for speedy inquiries, all that. And of course, we know that none of those happened, which is why finally we, the journalists, got together and decided that January has to be a significant month. That is why we call January Black January. I know this year there are some politicians who are trying to give it a different connotation, but initially Black January started to mark the many attacks on the media, because the month of January saw a large number of attacks on the media. As you rightfully pointed out, the attack on MTV, MBC, then Lasantha's murder, and then Pragit Eknaligoda's disappearance. And there were so many other instances as well. So I just took some of the main high-profile incidents. So when you took as an average, the month of January saw many attacks and murders and disappearances, which is why January became to be known as a Black January for the media. So today it is a very significant month. We are here and Lasanta's 7th death anniversary, and we are still marking Black January. My only hope is that this government will be able to convert that Black January into something white, where justice would prevail. Going back to what you said about the former president and Lasanta's investigation, yes, there were many instances where he promised, he even met some of Lasanta's family members and promised justice. But as you may have seen, 6 years down the line, he was in power during 6 years of that investigation. And 6 years, and there was nothing. In fact, the worst kind of things, possible things in an investigation has happened. We have found out in doing our investigation into Lasanta's murder, we have found that some of the main evidence that was in the custody of the police have gone missing. Lasanta's notebook has gone missing from the police, and the pages of the IB book in the police that recorded Lasanta's notebook and its content, those pages have gone missing.
It's absolutely shocking.
How would that happen? If that was applied, imagine the situation of the law and order in the country at that time. If something like that happens, and this is after the president has promised a speedy inquiry, and even the people who were taken into custody, 2 people were taken into custody, one mysteriously died while in prison, the other was released soon after he threatened to reveal details about Lasanta's murder and who ordered it. He made a doc statement and he was released. And up to now we don't have anyone in custody or any visible progress
and
yet.
What happened to that person who was released after making a doc statement?
Well, he is still a member of the military, and the records that we have found is that he is back in the military, serving back in the military, and we are yet to see any visible progress. Of course, a fresh probe was launched after the regime change, and the investigation that was handled by the TID was handed over to the Criminal Investigations Department, and of course the investigations are continuing on a daily basis. But I think we have wasted a lot of time on this investigation, because 7 years I think would have been good enough time to resolve the issue had there been had it been carried with conviction at that time.
Do you think that President Rajapaksa embarked on a deliberate course of sidelining any politicians who posed the remotest threat to his rule, to his presidency? Do you think that was very much evident?
Well, it was evident in certain ways. You would see that there were intelligent people even in the former regime, but you would see that they were just limited to bearing a name of they just hold a portfolio, and even powers that were initially vested with them were usurped by family members of the former first family. And yes, in certain ways it was visible. And when it came to the holding of absolute power, the visibility did not seem to matter either. It was basically a decision like tomorrow you think, okay, this is the person I listen to, and you listen to that person. And whoever who was around the first family, the former first family, were calling the shots. And a lot of intelligent people were in fact sidelined when it came to the decision-making process. The cabinet was almost converted into a place where ministers would just go in, sit and raise their hands and walk out. At least that's what members of the former cabinet have told us.
So it was like a rubber stamp.
Yes, it was.
Actually, I remember at the funeral of Bertie Premalal Dissanayake, late into the night, some ministers, including Minister Fauzi and so on, were there. And Minister Fauzi's relationship with Bertie wasn't exactly the best. However, he was there at the funeral. And I overheard this conversation in which Mr. Fauzi was sort of giving a heads up, in a way, to young Deminder, Bertie's son, who played such a major role in this Palane movement. And he said to him, he said, you know, you young politicians must be aware of what will happen. And so they thought that he was talking about Bertie, as in death or sudden. But actually, Mr. Fauzi was talking about something quite else.
Yes.
He was warning them as to what would happen to them politically, and how he, as a senior, was being sort of sidelined. Not only him, but many others. And the turnout there, that funeral that day, was absolutely amazing. And looking back, of course, we could see that this movement of change had actually already started, however subtle it may have been at the time. So these people, and you know, President Sirisena, a very sort of quiet, almost unheard of, but not really like that. But he wasn't anywhere in the front line, and for a person who was so, for his conscience to be aroused, and for someone who was quite happy in his and calm and you know, enjoying his life, for him to be moved to come forward in certainly very challenging circumstances. Do you think, what do you think made him come forward like that? He's taking a huge risk.
Yes. Well, I think for us it was more of a call of conscience to begin with, and the realization that you couldn't go any lower than where you were.
Right.
And the obvious thing is the pressure from a lot of people in the government, as well as from party members, I'm sure.
We'll come back to this very important question, Manu, after taking a short and quick commercial break. Stay tuned.
Newsfirst Newsline with Faraz Shaukatali.
Welcome back. This is Newsline, broadcasting live from Dawson Street from the Newsfirst studios. And today we mark the first anniversary of President Maithripala Sirisena's ascendancy to that role, and also tragically and very worryingly, we mark the 7th death anniversary of Lasantha Wickramatunge, the founder editor of the Sunday Leader newspaper, and respected and much loved figure here at Newsfirst too. Vandana, you were saying about President Sirisena's decision to come forward. Surely he must have been as frightened as hell.
I'm sure everyone was frightened at that time, because it was not an easy decision to make, and I know how difficult it was, you know, because you have to think about your family, and there are lots of issues that you have to consider, but still weighing all those, and then you realize that something more, you know, courage is sometimes not about absence of fear. It is about knowing that something else is more important than what you personally feel. So I feel that it was the need of the hour that they felt, as President Sirisena felt at the time, as well as that was a requirement of many people who love democracy, who wanted that freedom, and who did not want to see a dictatorship growing in a country that has a long way to go, and a country that can have a very bright future. So considering all that, and obviously the pressure from a lot of party members, including senior members, and I'm sure a lot of others as well, compelled President Sirisena, and the support extended by the opposition at the time, and where everyone decided to back President Sirisena's candidacy, given the support that he received and all that. I'm sure he felt that, okay, this is the time to make that decision regardless of the risks that he would have to face.
And talking about wastage, we are now treated almost, or I think that's the right word, treated to the information that President Sirisena's expenditure at President's house or at the presidency is only around 10% or 10 or 15% of what President Rajapaksa had spent. And that's just the starters. Do you think things like that actually sink in to the public mind?
Well, yes, it would, because given President Sirisena's simplicity in many ways, I'm sure the public understands that fact. But what is important for us is to remember that we are still here at the one year mark. We have several years more to go. Everybody who takes over the first few years, they do try to honor their pledges, and they do try to do what is perceived to be right by the country and its people. What is important is to make sure that it continues. That is what is important. So yes, President Sirisena's simplicity, simple lifestyle, and his efforts taken to minimize wastage of public funds is commendable. But how commendable it would be should be discussed at the end of his term. Because we are still at the beginning. We need to see it continuing and improving in the years to come. That's where the difference would be felt.
He seems to be very much a hands-off operator, in the sense that he has handed much of the running of the country to his political partner, Ranil Wickremesinghe, and with a mixed cabinet and so on. How well do you think that is from your perspective as the editor-in-chief of this newspaper that people love to read? How do you think that's working out?
Well, it is a new concept, I should say. It is a new concept, and of course I have seen many hiccups as well, but given that it is a new concept, and I think if it is adapted properly, it would be one of the best scenarios a country could have. And such a mixed system is actually a way of preventing a lot of wastage and corruption, because they look at each other and they try to keep each other on their toes. Yeah. So it is a good concept if it is adapted properly. And of course, as I said again, it is a new concept, so yes, there are some ups and downs, but I'm sure they can be worked out. And so far it seems as if it's working out, but it's not at the rate and the level that the public would have expected it, because it's a little slow in coming out when it comes to action. But then again, they are still working things out, and it seems like, looking at the budget, it seems like they are moving forward. So maybe give a little more time and see how it goes.
So we can see this flicker of an LED light at the end of this long dark tunnel.
It seems like there is a light at the end of the tunnel, but my only hope is that it's not an oncoming train.
We must be wary of that.
Yes.
But what is the development of the highways, the roads network, the power sector, the general infrastructure development? How much does that count in favor of the Mahinda Rajapaksa presidency?
Yes, when it came to infrastructure development, there were lots of visible developments that took place during the former Rajapaksa regime. There's no doubt about it. But the question is whether having a highway alone was the answer, and whether building highways and convention centers and ports and airports and everything in an area that is not usually used by many people, spending billions of rupees of public funds, was a good idea. I mean, that needs to be considered. And also, sometimes when you decide to launch a project using foreign funding, foreign loans and foreign funding, you have to decide whether the country can afford it. Because at the end of the day, you're writing a check on behalf of the country. It's the people's money that you are using. So whether you can freely be very extravagant when it comes to spending public funds should have been thought of. because even today we are still a country massively in debt due to some of those decisions that were made, and in some instances some of the projects have been white elephants as well. So sometimes visible development is good, but more than that there needs to be proper ground development. And the economy has to be on a firm footing. We need to have a state coffer that actually has money. So I think first we need to consider that aspect. And yes, of course we need that infrastructure development in order to increase our growth levels. But for that to happen, we have to have other indicators moving on an upward scale as well. So during the former regime, I don't think that was considered that well. There were many arguments and debates about statistics that were inflated by certain authorities, and so therefore certain decisions taken to launch certain projects resulted in a large number of public funds just flowing out of the country without a proper revenue generation method. So as a result, the state coffers were drying up very fast. That was a bad indication where the country's economy is concerned. There's so much that you can hold on to a country's economic development with inflated records. At some point the bubble would burst.
And I haven't forgotten about this, but I saved it as a separate question to discuss with you. What about the war victory, the victory over terror? What about that then? What sort of an achievement do we view that as?
Ending the 30-year-old war was definitely an achievement for the former regime. That's why sometimes I say that the former regime was one of the luckiest governments I think the country has seen. They had a golden opportunity after ending the war to steer the country on the right direction. But instead we saw the country taking a very dictatorial line, and that was bad. After ending the war alone is not the answer. It is an answer to a huge question, no doubt about it. But still there was more to be done. Ending the war did not end that gap we have caused between a lot of people in the country. Reconciliation plays a huge role. Accountability plays a huge role. The issues that we are talking now played a huge role post-war. But none of those were properly addressed, because winning the war alone would not address all the issues the country was facing during the period of the war. Reconciliation is not about appointing a committee and asking for a report and forgetting about the report and not implementing the recommendations. Reconciliation does not mean sending a Sinhala public servant fluent in Tamil to the north and getting someone from the north to Colombo and giving them a job here. Reconciliation does not mean that. It's more than that. And that did not happen.
And as we come to the close, in your view, is there, even today, a cover-up with regard to the investigation on Lasante's murder?
Well, a cover-up I cannot say, because the investigation is progressing at the moment. I think that is something we will have to wait and see, because the investigation, the fresh probe into Lasante's murder was launched by the CID a couple of months back. And so far it is an ongoing process. And they have managed to uncover a lot of details related to the murder. And so whether there would be a cover-up, we would have to wait and see. But I sincerely hope there wouldn't be. And I have a feeling that this time around we might actually resolve the case.
Mandane Ismail Abe Vikraman, thank you very much for being on Newsline this morning. And as we remember Lasante's unlawful killing and the investigation ongoing, we are also inspired perhaps by the fact that today is the first anniversary of President Maithripala Sirisena's presidency, and so there is some hope. But it probably pays to remember that in this world of complexities, simple things become realities. Thank you for watching Newsline. Take care and have a great day. God bless.
Newsfirst Newsline with Faraz Shaukat Ali.